Hey there friend, thanks for watching. Today we're going to bring an object from a 3D scan into virtual reality, retopologize it, I think that's how you say that, and then add some materials in Substance Painter and export that out to Sketchfab. So this is just kind of the process I've created to retopo inside of virtual reality, which you could do in Blender, and there's a bunch of different ways you could model in Blender, but it's kind of fun to 3D scan some stuff with today's tools on the iPhone using the TRNIO app, and then bring that into virtual reality, into Gravity Sketch, and re-typologize it. So let's get into that process now, and I'll show you on the computer. So here is the model that we're going to try to recreate this morning. This is the model that I made at the end of this and uploaded to Sketchfab. As you can see, some materials applied to this that we're going to add in Substance Painter. Now this is not the most detailed of models, but it gives you a good starting point, and you can see where we started right here. So I drew out a kind of a little graphic on a piece of paper, which then I rotated around inside of the TRNIO app, and also took some photographs of the model so that we could add some detail once we get this model created. So the app output a OBJ file that looks like this. Now it's not the best of scans, but it does allow you to have something to work with, a mesh to start with that you can then start to model and get the proportions correctly. Like I said, there's ways to bring images into Blender and just trace them and create meshes inside of Blender, but it's also fun to do in VR. Now, just as a comparison, I brought the same images into the Capture Reality, Reality Capture program, and reconstructed it. And you can see, although this program requires you to pay to export the OBJ file, whereas TRNIO doesn't. This one, the reconstruction of the bottle, that the reflections and things like that, just didn't quite look as nice as the other app did, which is kind of surprising. The textures, though, the quality of the texturing is a lot better inside of this app. You can see that the images are cleaner and clearer on the bottle, but the actual mesh that it created, I would say, is not as good as the mesh that came out of the TRNIO app. So what you might be able to do is take this mesh, if you were to export it with the better materials and that kind of stuff, and then re-typologize inside of VR, and then basically bake those textures from the Capture Reality onto your re-typologized app, and it would probably be, or OBJ, and it would probably be better overall than the app. But this is just a very quick way to do it. So I exported to a folder. I did all this in one morning. So if you're trying to create a bunch of models that you want to put on Sketchfab, and you got some stuff laying around the house, then it would be awesome to try this method out. So there's my OBJ, the material file, and the image that's referenced in that material file. So now you could go through and create your own folder sequence and structure, but I have a template folder, which saves a lot of time, and I basically organize it by program that I'm going to use. It's got all the different programs for different types of model making, and I can keep my associated files inside of those program named folders. So I'm going to open up my Blender template. I just want to change the rendering to cycles. I always do that, and I probably need to save that back into my template. But I'm going to bring in the OBJ file. So we're going to import. This is the original one from the TRNIO app. You can see that the mesh is pretty good. There's some defects in it in a bunch of different little places, but overall it's got the shape and the form. You can turn on materials, and you've got some quick materials there. Now this is not good enough to use for anything other than a base. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this, and I'm going to open up Instant Meshes. This is another free program, such as Blender is free, and I'm going to open up the mesh and bring that in to basically re-typologize automatically. So we'll find this from Torino, bring that in. And you can see it there. Nothing is ever flipped the right way, but oh well. So we've got our high density, high poly mesh here. So we're going to keep this as quads. You can see the target vertex count, it's reducing that to about 5,000. And we will do a solve. And that creates this little kind of directional thing. And then we'll solve the next section here. And then we will go to export mesh, and we will extract the mesh out of this. Okay, so you see it reduced it greatly from what it once was. There's still some defects, but overall it's a nice little, very simple mesh here. So I'm going to save this as low poly, and you got to put .obj or it's not going to save. So we'll do that one, but I also want one that's got a little bit more definition this, just to see if we get a little bit better deal out of it, better mesh. So I'm going to put it up to about 21, possibly. There we go, 21. And we'll solve this, and then we'll solve the other pattern section or position section. Okay, so we got that. So we'll export, extract mesh. You can see it's a little bit higher density. Get us a little bit more to work on. And we'll say mid poly .obj. Okay, so we got that. Now you could bring those directly into Blender, and it's gonna pop in right over your high poly mesh. And you could do like a cycles texture bake onto that low poly from the high poly. That's possible. And you'll basically bake all the textures from the high poly onto the low poly and clean that up. So there's one method. The other method is to actually re-typologize this inside of Blender, which there's some videos on YouTube about how to do that, where you basically draw polygons on top of this, and then you project the image from the high density mesh. But I'm going to take this actually into Gravity Sketch. So I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to go here to import, and it never shows up. So you open up this window here, go back to your desktop, drag the mid poly, because that's just a little bit more detail. Copy and paste that into the Gravity Sketch import library folder. We'll close these, and you have to get out of that sketch inside Gravity Sketch and open up a new one, and you will see when we go back here, now mid poly is listed there. So you can't grab it until you load it, and then we want to turn the scale factor, scale gizmo deal on. So we'll grab this out and we'll drop it till it turns green inside the scale gizmo. That puts it at 0, 0 coordinates, and it also scales it according to your OBJ. Now that's fine, but we're going to end up moving it around. So we'll save this one as spray, which is its original location. But I want to set up some layers here, so we'll call this OBJ, and then we'll create a new layer that we're going to call mesh for now, but we will rename it for a bunch of different parts and pieces and stuff. So I think I'm maxed out at like 4 or 5 layers, but you can have multiple objects on a layer. So you could basically build all the Retopology separate components into that one mesh layer, and they would all export separately. Okay, so I made the OBJ a little bit transparent so I could see through it, and I want to go to the settings and turn on the mirror. So this is going to drop my mirror plane, and it puts it in the wrong location. So I think there might be a way to move the mirror plane instead of moving the model, which would be awesome, but I'm not sure how to do that. So I just move the model around until it's in a good mirrored position right down the center of it, which is kind of tricky to get it in the right spot. So once you got it, go ahead and lock that layer. And we will save this file as a new name. Since we moved the model around, might as well keep the other one available to us if we need to. So now we're in here, we can go to the primitive and turn on this subdivision object, and then we'll start with a cube here, and we'll put this in. Before we do that, we want to change the color of this cube before we start moving it all around. So we'll click the color wheel, just drag it into place, and the color you want. And then you'll see if you select this with your right grip and then click the little blue dot, then you can start to subdivide this thing. It's got different levels of subdivision: low poly, high poly, and then you can turn the subdivision on or off if you don't want it to actually subdivide. So we're going to build this all low poly, no subdivision, and we'll just start grabbing these pieces and moving them around. So when you move to the mirror line, it locks in place like this, and you see a little lock feature there. So now it's locked on that mirror plane, and we can just start dragging this stuff around. So this is where it gets, you know, kind of tedious, but also fun at the same time, because you're rebuilding this whole thing inside of virtual reality. So it's really big all around you, and feel like you're really inside the space there. So we've got, you can see we've got the base form there. Now we're going to start working on the cap here, and then after that I'll do the head and of the spray nozzle and the trigger. So those are all the 4 different components that I built separately, and the reason I'm building those separately is so I can add different materials to those different things. And you'll see later in Blender that comes in handy when you've got multiple objects you can kind of tweak around. So just go through and retopologize this whole deal. Once we've got that done, we'll bring it into Blender, see what it looks like. All right, there's some wonky things, but there's some okay things. I'm going to delete out the OBJ because I don't need that extra data inside the model. And I'm going to go ahead and just unlock these. And now we can save this model, and then we will give it a different name here. All right, we'll save that. Now we want to export the spray bottle. So I'm gonna keep it in centimeters, do welded, and export. Okay. So that creates a zip file with materials. The OBJ and the materials are there. We're gonna extract that. And we just delete this. All right, so let's open up Blender. And this is where it would come in handy if you could move the mirror plane as opposed to moving the model. Because you can see this is going to come in the wrong place, but it's also going to come in the wrong scale. But if it came in the wrong scale in the right place, we could scale it down pretty easily to get it to fit right on top of our existing model. But that's okay. We're not going to really use that existing model for anything more than just creating this mesh inside of Gravity Sketch. So it's just basically a foundation. So I'm going to take this and go ahead and line it up to the relative size of this bottle, and then I'm going to move it into the center position of Blender workspace here. Then we're going to start messing with some of these materials, and all the materials I'm going to use Substance Painter to paint all those materials on. But you can see the vertexes of that mesh are pretty good. Probably more detailed than you need based on the look of what we got here. Since this is a very simple reconstruction of this model, but it'll be fine. I'm gonna eventually load this up to Sketchfab here in this video. So What you need to do though is this comes in with one object, but it's got multiple objects inside of that object. So I basically create copies of the model, duplicates of the entire mesh, and then I'll delete out all the different parts. So first I'm going to sit here and create these duplicates here real quick. Hold on. Go back to object mode and do Shift D and then escape, and then I'll basically create a duplicate in the same exact spot. So I'm just going to do that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, creating four times 5 different objects. Okay, so we got all these. Now we can rename these with different parts. And this is just the way I do it. I don't know if you have to do it this way. I just like having separate models for all the separate different parts. I go through and clean it up and delete out the different parts from. There might be a way just to split the whole thing in Blender. If somebody knows, please comment below, because I'd like to know how to speed this process up. Alright, so now that you have these broken out, you can go into the edit mode, select the object that you want to keep, and do Control and the plus on the number pad, and that'll just grow your selection to that object, and then do select invert. That'll get all the other vertices and delete those out, delete, and then V for vertices. So now I've got a clean object of the base there. So I'm just going to go through and do that for all those, and that's what I've done. So I've got all these different objects here that I can turn on individually, and this would be useful if you want to export these out individually to Substance or something like that, or if you needed to whatever you need to do with those. But now that we've got these, I'm going to start creating the seams for the UV maps. So we'll select all these lines in a pattern around the object. I'm basically going to split it down the middle here, pretty much where the mirror line was inside of Gravity Sketch. So you just go around hitting Control and then left clicking, I believe it's Control. Once you got that, you can do mark seam. That'll create the seam marks. I'm going to do the same thing around the base here and mark that seam. And now you can select everything by pressing A in edit mode. So A, and then press U for UV mapping, and click unwrap. And that'll unwrap that material or that UV map onto a material. And you can see here, I'm going to separate those a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing for all these other objects, basically telling it where I want the UV to split up. Okay, so now I have all those. I'm going to save that. And we're going to start adding a couple materials to these. Now basically I have two different materials, the base material and then the spray nozzle material. There's going to be two different plastics. One is going to be more of a rougher plastic and one's going to be more glossy. So I deleted out all the old materials. I probably could have kept them, but I deleted them out. So I'm going to create new materials, one called plastic clear, which is the base with the logo and label on it, and then plastic white, which is the nozzle, and it's a more glossy finish. Now looking back, I probably could have added a lot more detail to this nozzle spray head, but doing all this in a couple hours in the morning, it's just an easy way to be lazy and just do it kind of quickly. So I'm going to create a couple, like a plastic material here really quickly inside of Substance Alchemist. So I'm going to search for plastic, and I'll find one that's kind of glossy-ish. Okay, so I'll send that one to the Alchemist, and I'll go here and find it. It's one of these white ones. There it is. So I'm going to drag that in. And that looks fine. I don't need to be too particular about this. So I'm going to go to the, first I'm going to save it. Save it, and then we'll go to the export area, and we'll export current view. And I like to basically export three different channels, the base color, the normal, and the glossiness. So I'll export those three to PNG files. And then we'll go back here and we'll select the principled. And if you have this little add-on, you can press Shift Control T and then find the three materials, select them all at once, and principled textured setup. It'll like automate the whole texture setup process so that you can quickly add all those maps and stuff. All right, so we got these. I've applied the other one to the top. We're going to export as an OBJ with the materials on. Now there's something I did, since I've got all these different maps made for all the different trigger, head, all that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, I mapped all those on top of the same image, so there's some overlap going on. You're going to see that in the video where I overlap some textures, but I'm going to kind of deal with it outside of Substance Painter. In Photoshop, I'm just going to kind of move some stuff around. In Blender, move the UV maps out of the way, and I'm going to add these, just add all these materials, open, and then we'll import this file. Okay, so we got it here. The main thing we want to do here is go into projection mode, and we want to grab some of those images where I have labels and things like that. So I'm going to import into resources. I'm going to add a resource. I'm going to find one of those images that I took of the front label. So we'll put this guy in, we'll open it, and we'll tell it that it's going to go to the current session. And then the image is going to be, instead of unidentified, we're going to change that to a texture. And say import. You see it pops into the shelf down there. So we're going to click and drag this into the base color of the paintbrush that we're using. So we'll drop it in right there. Alright, so you can see it came in sideways, which is great. So press S and you can like start to manipulate that projection layer. So it navigates the same way as your model. You just have to hold down S to get it to do anything, kind of like you have to hold down Alt with the actual model. So we'll rotate the model around, move it kind of in the center here, and then I want this image actually to be a lot bigger so we can paint it a lot easier. So do that, and then we'll move the model, scale the model up in the view till it fits, and then you can just basically paint this on. It's super simple. So I've got my opacity kind of low because I like to build up the edges so it doesn't look so harsh where they transition between the colors there. So I go over a couple times and end up with this. And you can see it's kind of applied to the mesh itself. It's got some curvature. It's fits it perfectly. You could add normal maps to it to give it more relief, kind of where it would bump out, all that kind of stuff. You can also take the eraser if it doesn't blend very well and erase some of the edges so that you get more of a blending look on that. And you can see there's my texture problem up there on the nozzle because we don't want labels up there, but that's okay. We're going to export this base image texture and bring that in separately from that up there anyway. So export texture. We'll go through all these settings. Basically, we just need to change where we put the image, and this is where it pays to go ahead and have some folders made, but you can do a new one called export. So we'll select that folder and we'll just go ahead and export. And boom, we got some textures. All right, so we're going to go back into Blender, and I'm going to change the image that I was pulling from to this new base color image. And boom, we have it right there. Look at that. So overall, this is pretty much what I wanted the whole thing to look like. I'm going to add a little bit more detail to the spray nozzle, just one little like swoop of a graphic and then some grip to the cap area. And I'm going to go through that kind of quickly here, speed that process up. Basically, it's the same thing we did previously. I'm just going to do it twice as fast. Okay, and here it is, all in its isopropylene glory. So this is the final Blender model. Very simple process, I guess, if you have a couple minutes to go through it all. It is a lot of steps, and but you can see it would be, you know, the scanning of the image, first of all, gives you a good proportion and scale to the thing. And then basically bringing that into VR allows you to clean all that stuff up pretty easily with very little modeling knowledge. Like if you're not very familiar with modeling tools, you can bring that into the VR Gravity Sketch and get that up and running really quickly and do some very complicated shapes just by moving things around with your hand. So that's the key there with that. And then bring this into Sketchfab and start bringing in all the materials and adjusting those things on top of this mesh model. Adjust some lighting. You can get a lot of really cool lighting effects inside of Sketchfab. Very simple. You don't have to have a bunch of high-tech lighting abilities inside Blender to really get some good effects. You can see I've got some problems with my spray nozzle head materials. I didn't spend enough time getting all that mapped out correctly. But let's just say it's dirty in this model and it's used. It's not a pristine model. So maybe this has been sitting around in somebody's bathroom for a while and needs to be put away. But it'd be a good asset to quickly throw into a model if you were doing a rendering of something where you needed this just maybe on the shelf of a grocery store or in somebody's cabinet or something. But that's basically the process of taking an actual physical object, 3D scanning it, retopologizing it, and adding materials that look fairly realistic, and then getting that thing on Sketchfab for other people to view and share. So hope you enjoyed this video. If you found some value out of it, please like, subscribe, all the things down below, and leave me a comment. I'd like to know what you thought of this. If you've got simpler ways of doing things, better ways, just let me know. I'd love to hear it. I'm totally open to learning more about this whole process, and I will be sharing my journey all along the way as I create more and more of this stuff. So thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you in the next video.